So this week on the Stereo Image, we have our first member of jazz royalty. Eric Mingus is not good enough to join us and talk a little bit about music. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for coming on.
Hey man, thank you for having me, Mike.
It's an honor. I want to go start right off the bat by saying I'm a huge fan of yours, and the stuff that you've put out. I just want to say I'm stammering a little bit because I don't usually go all fanboy on people, but your voice just kills me. I mean, there's it's so deep and so much in everything you sing. I love it. I love your stuff.
Oh man, thank you.
Um,
Thank you so much.
um, basically, we usually just talk about music in people's lives, but obviously, music is your life. And
Yeah.
so it's going to be a little harder to corral it in. But this latest project that you've done, you want to talk a little bit about that?
I mean the one I just with Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then the previous one before that too with Gil Scott Heron
Oh right, yeah.
stuff.
Was it? Yeah. I mean that's a
Um,
Gil Scott Heron tribute.
Yeah, but
That,
yeah, tell me about the Yo-Yo Ma stuff because it's really fascinating. It's
yeah. I
really
just
great.
sort of. I mean um, the Yo-Yo connection just kind of happened. I'll do the deeper story.
Sure,
So for many
sure.
years, I was good friends with the producer Hal Wilner. Um,
Right.
who did many different things, but one of the things he did was there was an album he did of my father's work called
Right.
Weird Nightmare that was, sort of
Yeah.
great combinations of people. And I was fortunate to be kind of one of his, I would sing in he would do these concerts and it was sort of the live version of what he'd been doing of records. So, we did a Bill Withers concert, a few different ones where, he would choose a couple of songs for me to do. And the people that used to produce those concerts out of the blue. We unfortunately lost Hal during
Yeah.
COVID time, but I got a phone call or an email, I think maybe, that my friends were down in North Carolina, in this great Smoky Mountains on the North Carolina side, and they said,
Hmm.
there's this mill here called Mingus Mill, and we didn't know that your grandfather was born there. And I said, well, and I said, yeah, I mean, it's not, in our family story, it's not necessarily one we talked about because that's also, not only was my grandfather born there, but that's where the enslaved Minguses came from. That's how we got our
Right.
name. Mingus is a slave name. So it wasn't, we were like, oh, let's all head down there and have a picnic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
So, but and I'd never been, and I don't think I had actually thought about going there.
Hmm.
But they said, we've been here, and the park rangers are really trying to bring forward the African American history in this location.
Hmm.
And then I started to realize how tied I am to that land. I don't know if you're familiar with the Harry Smith collection, the folk music
Oh,
collection.
sure.
Yeah, that
Absolutely.
inspired Bob Dylan. Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and actually, I knew Harry Smith a little. I spoke to him a lot of times, and we had spoken about the Smoky Mountains long before I even really committed to having that's kind of where my family's from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we were talking about because I had said to him, I said, I love that compilation, and what I always really find fascinating is he didn't sort of say, this is the black artist, this is the white artist, or
Right.
and he said something to me that still sticks with me. The Mingus family were mixed anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
my great grandfather Daniel Mingus, who was enslaved and then
Hmm.
freed, stayed on to work with the Mingus family, and he had a child, which is my grandfather, with the granddaughter of the house. So that was,
Right.
that's our line. So this connection,
Yeah.
awkward connection of slave owner and slave.
Right.
But anyway, so they were working on trying to put the presence there. And Harry Smith, I had sent that to him, and he said, "Well, it's the history of music in the Great Smoky Mountains is quite interesting," because he said, you know, there were white people that passed for black, and black people that passed for white, and a lot of people were mixed race, and it was a real like
Hmm.
you know,
Melting
there's a
pot, yeah.
melting pot there, and he said that's sort of what he was trying to show, that we're more musical beings, if anything else, you know.
Right.
So I always found that really fascinating. And then they asked if I would. They were planning on presenting a wayside, or a plaque or something to sort of represent, to start
Sh
honoring that there was a slave cemetery right near the Mingus Mill, and they wanted to
Okay.
also sort of honor my family line down there.
Sure.
So they asked if I would write a piece of music to commemorate it, and come down there. And I said, yeah,
Mhm.
I'd love to do it. And it just so happened around the time that was going on, my wife and I, you now know that we apparently rescue animals because, as I told you, we have
Clearly, yeah.
7 puppies and a mother visiting with us. Um, a friend of ours had a tortoise, and you can't fly with a tortoise, so we couldn't fly up to New York.
Wow.
So we drove from New Mexico up to New York to get a tortoise, and drove down. And on the drive down, we stopped in North Carolina, and we visited the place, and it was really amazing. I'd never, my family, we moved around a lot. I've moved around a lot. You know, I was born in New York City, but probably moved away when I was pretty young, and so I never
Mhm.
really felt at home anywhere.
Right.
So it was interesting to land in a place that felt more like home than anything I'd ever experienced. It just felt very natural to me, which is, again, not only were we stolen people, we were brought to a stolen land, because that was actually Cherokee land at the time.
Okay. Right.
And the Mingus family, the white Mingus family, were the first to settle there. So already, there's a whole long,
Right.
there's a whole long thing going on there. Um,
Yeah.
but I got there, and I went up to the cemetery, which isn't, it's really just a small clearing just above the parking lot that you wouldn't notice.
Mhm.
And there's these small stones, and there's these mounds, which people assume are the graves, but actually it's between the mounds is where the people are buried, because interestingly enough, they were in coffins, which is unusual. But Daniel, my great grandfather, was a carpenter, so we believe that he built
Ah.
the coffins. So
Mhm.
coffins um, deteriorate, the ground sinks in. So
I see.
there's these little dishes.
Right.
So I went up there, and this is family in the ground, and I never experienced that either. I had, my father was cremated, and his ashes were put in the Ganges River in India.
Right.
I never, I don't have a lot of family. My mother's side of the family didn't want anything to do with us because she'd married a black man.
Oh,
My mom being
Christ.
a white.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I never knew what it was like to go visit a family member's grave. So that
Right.
was also a whole other, like, the concept that there were people in this ground that were connected to me, that carried the same blood, was really
Yeah.
fascinating. And I essentially, before getting the commission or anything, wrote the piece that day,
Oh, no kidding.
sitting
Wow.
there. And it was really, it's very moving. The mill stands there, and I don't think it's functioning now because there was some issue with the beam, but at the time I was there, the mill functions. They don't really talk about the history of the people. Um, they talk about it as a an example of what it was like to be there in that time period, and this is how the mill worked. It was unique because it was a second mill in its location, um,
Ah,
but it's a metal turbine, which was uncommon. It was high tech for the time.
sure.
And so anyway, so I wrote this piece, and I went home, and it's actually on one of my records on its own, called,
Well, what year was this? When did you first go down there to get
geez,
the
I'm trying to
tortoise?
remember. It was a good 4 years ago, maybe.
Oh, so it was but it was recent. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it's recent. And then, the
yeah.
development of it was, I sent the demo for them to hear, and they loved
Mhm.
it. And then they said, Yo-Yo Ma loved it, and he heard it, and he'd love to perform it with you at the event. So,
Nice.
we went
Yeah.
down, and next thing you know, I'm, standing next to Yo-Yo Ma singing the piece, which was amazing. I mean, Yo-Yo and I connect on a lot of levels. His first cello teacher was his father when he was about 5, 6 years old, or maybe 4.
Ah,
And so my first cello teacher was my father at about the same age. And,
right.
so that was really interesting. And he's very supportive of the work I've done. And, what's really fascinating was or is, I don't know, my background in music is so blurred. I think I'd like to call it
Mhm.
that because, I have a great knowledge of jazz. I was taught by my father, but I don't necessarily land in the jazz realm.
Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
and I guess it's how you define jazz. I mean, if we're going to talk about
Yeah,
music, which I
yeah,
guess we
but
should.
also jazz so clearly influences everything you do.
Yeah. Oh, for
I
sure.
mean, it's but I understand you're not, you're not playing standards,
Yeah, and it's not something. I
in
mean, I
general.
will, at times, but
No, I know, yeah.
but I guess where I'm trying to draw the line of the definition of jazz is, for me, it's the spirit of the people that created music that eventually became jazz.
Right.
Where it
Okay.
wasn't, because my father used to say, he didn't really consider himself a jazz musician either. It was very much part
Right.
of his thing, but he was like, or in fact,
Yeah.
what he said that I always loved was, the minute they called me a jazz musician, I stopped making money.
Right, right. How true.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, it is true because actually in his timeline, he was in LA and up in the 40s and 50s, he was one of the top studio bass players.
mhm.
There's some great records in the, late 30s into the 40s, into the 50s, probably no more, I'd say more, sorry, mid 40s into the early 50s, where it was, it'd be like Illinois Jaquette and the Jazz All Stars. And my dad was one of the Jazz All Stars. I mean, there's
Right.
literally, I think, I mean, I was looking at his pay stubs for his
Uh-huh.
studio work, and there must be thousands of sessions,
Wow.
not not hundreds, like thousands,
Right.
like it's
That's
ins
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and they apparently, like, blew out records in, multiple numbers in a day,
Yeah.
in a funny way, I'm almost more impressed by my dad as a studio musician than almost anything else he did, just for the pure stamina of it.
Right.
And he was also working in Hollywood. He did some extra work with Dexter Gordon and
Mhm.
stuff like that, in films.
Yeah.
But actually, he had a buddy named Red Callender, another
Oh,
bassist.
sure. Yeah, I
You
know
know,
Red, yeah.
and Red hooked him up with sort of the Hollywood composers, and he landed with Dmitri Toynkin,
Oh,
who,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
and
so
so my dad was kind of an orchestrator for him. So, Dmitri would say, I need a theme for this section. Here's a melody, and hand it to him. My dad would orchestrate it. And
wow.
now as I've been digging deeper, my dad may well have been just scoring the film for Dmitri. For,
Right.
it's sort of leaning that way. Not that Dmitri couldn't do the work, but he believed in farming it out,
Right,
and
right. Well, I mean,
yeah,
that's a very common thing in LA.
yeah,
I as a matter of fact, a guitar player that I work with occasionally, Graham Decter, his father's Brad Decter, and he's like one of the guys that John Williams just hands everything to. And John Williams writes a thing and then he orchestrates it, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Um,
and my dad, and Ellington did it too.
right.
He did it too.
Yeah.
Horn, and so it was very much part of my dad's thing as well, equally
Mhm.
to do that. But anyway, so then when he started really leaning into jazz, or I guess bebop really was coming in. They were saying, "Oh, you should go to New York," you know. And
Mhm.
so he did. But I think that's also
Right.
when, they started calling him a jazz musician, and then obviously he didn't have all
Then
the
all of a sudden
work.
there's yeah, there goes the income. Right.
And he, at the time, he was with his second wife, Celia, and they
Mm.
actually moved into a building which is now, right by Charlie Parker Way in Tompkins Square Park. It's the same
Oh,
building that he lives upstairs, I think, from Charlie Parker,
wow.
when they moved in. So there's that whole, and if I know there's that well-known photo with Monk, Parker, Roy Haynes.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
That would be that era, that
Right.
time when he was there. And so it was hard. He landed. It was not, when they said that joke when they called me a jazz musician, I stopped making money. That literally was what happened.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so anyway,
And to be, to move across country with your wife and have no income in a strange city.
and she
And I
left.
mean
She was like, I'm not having this. She got, I think she got pregnant with my brother
Oh,
Dorian,
gee.
and she said, I'm
Mhm.
gone.
Wow.
And then my mom came onto the scene, which is really fascinating. So my mom doesn't necessarily get the credit because she was sort of between Celia, who's people know about, and then Sue, who's
Right. And
his
Sue,
last
yeah,
wife.
who
My
yeah.
mother was the one like that basically, and I went to the Library of Congress and kind of went through all my dad's personal documents. And I think I'm one of the first person who ever went through the financial um, information, which to me, if you're going to investigate, that's where you get the information. And I saw like
Absolutely.
I saw a very disorganized Charles Mingus and very disorganized wives. And then my mom got in there who like could balance the checkbook like mad and he
Mhm.
kind of ran his business and you could see it like all of a sudden things got he actually got quite successful under her time,
Wow.
so when she passed it
Yeah.
off to Sue she had it all set up.
Oh, man. Yeah, yeah, and she set the table.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you were born in New York, though?
Yeah.
You're younger than me. So you said you guys moved out of the city?
Yeah, my parents, it wasn't really working well, and it was
Mhm.
I guess it's more in the 70s really at this time. And
Yeah.
he had there was a lot going on because my mom was there when Max Roach and my dad's, were together working on, records for debut records and sort of
Mhm.
and I always, my mom's story with my dad I love because that, she was sort of working class, White Plains girl,
Mhm.
but he dressed her up like, a debutante and all that. And
Sure.
they did the Rebel Jazz Festival, that was sort of the
Oh, yeah.
they
I
did
remember
that.
that.
She
Mhm.
worked on that, and she was essentially, I mean, Charles Mingus, if you were married to him and you were a woman, you were his manager, that's how that
Sure.
worked, and it was expected. Um, you know, so she did a lot of work for him, getting it together, the record label, all sorts of stuff that she did. And then sort of she had my sister, and then when she was pregnant with me, she couldn't go out with him as much. So that's
Mhm.
how Sue sort of came into the scene. So they overlapped. So right
Oh,
around the time I was born, they had started a relationship. Sue never mentions any of this in her book.
right.
But so what had happened was when my father was out with Sue, he would, as an excuse, he would say that Sue was his manager. Now,
Oh,
Sue at the time ran her own magazine called Changes and had no interest in being my dad's manager. But what would
right.
happen, people would call my mom thinking it was, asking for Sue. And she'd be like, no, you have the wrong number. And then they'd be like, she was like, all right, something's going on, like, because my
Oh,
mom,
man.
she like, if again, you go to Library of Congress and you find all the address books from the 50s into the 60s, it's
Mhm.
all my mom's handwriting, all the checks.
Wow.
It's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
One of the things I found, Charles McPherson, amazing saxophone player, worked with my
Yeah.
dad. There was a receipt for him. I think he got paid $10 to babysit my sister. Like that. That's in the Library of Congress. It's awesome.
Wha
Eh,
wow.
so like that. But it was fun to see that and sort of see
Yeah.
how cool my mom was. But yeah, there was this overlap, and so it probably around they late 60s and the 70s they was they'd figured it out, but my dad really wanted my mom to stay in New York so he could hang out with us. And and I think he was bucking for sort of an open relationship. He wanted to have
Right, sure.
my mom, his wife, and Sue at the same time, but my
Right.
mom wasn't having it, so she kind of in a way, still I will say this, she wasn't with him anymore, but she was taking his handwritten pages of Beneath the Underdog and typing them for him.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean that was, she's an important part of the I'm trying to get her story out there too. Um,
Good.
I have this project called Invisible Work, which is, it's really about trying to show the work of the people behind the scenes. And
Right.
and it's true of my father, he had a lot of people behind him and a lot of people that worked with him. And I think the current story that's out there doesn't really acknowledge that,
No.
a
Yeah,
lot of times, and I will tell you, a lot of people don't even know he had children. That's the other,
right. Yeah.
that's the other thing. I just happen to be the most visible one of all of us at the moment. But,
Right. Well, and I
there's
mean,
only
well,
3 of us left, but originally there were 6 of us, you know.
wow. Well, and also you have a viable career and you're a public figure, you know what I mean? You were born in New York, but you've been all over the place. But in your teenage years, when I don't know if this is sensitive or not, but when your dad started to get sick and stuff, were you close by him or were you sort of out of the picture at that point?
No, I was there.
Yeah.
I will say, Sue, we were living in upstate New York around, a town called Rosendale, New York,
Hmm.
far from New Paltz, Kingston, New York. Um,
Right.
and Sue bought a house up in Woodstock. So my dad would come up there and we visited
Okay.
there. And my sister and I would go down and visit him in the city. We would visit him as much as we could be. Yeah, it was a tough time. Building
Oh.
up to that, like my sister would, go down and visit my dad, and this is before anybody realized he had ALS. And she said, "What's
Mhm.
wrong with dad?" And a lot of at the time there was a lot going on, and it's sort of it's when you think about it now, like this is the stuff that I find difficult is that at the time, the doctors weren't necessarily believing of African American people when they said they were not feeling pain, like if something was wrong, they would just say, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
just overweight," just whatever.
Oh, yeah,
But
sure.
clearly he
Yeah.
was having problems and we would see it, but nobody it felt like nobody was listening. And it was really
Right.
frustrating
Oh.
time. Um, and and also because he was overweight, the musicians union wouldn't cover his that he paid into for many, many years,
Right.
wouldn't cover his insurance.
Oh my
So
god.
they were really struggling, for money.
Yeah.
It was not a, it was, it was a disease at the time. I mean, there's no cure currently.
Right.
They really didn't know anything about it. They didn't know where it came from. There was like they were investigating things, and like there was a football team where three members of the football team had gotten ALS, and they thought it possibly was from AstroTurf. Like that's where they were at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
didn't know anything, and it was very difficult. And I remember, Sue being overwhelmed with that, and who wouldn't be, just
Well, yeah.
trying to get the coverage, and
Well, yeah, and the emotion of it too,
yeah,
I mean, it's funny, you're talking about it, this was the 1970s. It wasn't like the 1920s, you know what
right,
I mean? You would think that by that point that they would, but again, everything's different. Medical stuff changes really quickly, but
yeah,
it's fucking insurance, man. It's like
yeah.
and the union. I mean, don't get me started on the union, you
Yeah,
know?
I don't well, I gotta be honest, I'm not in the union, never been in the
Me
union.
neither.
Yeah, yeah,
Me neither.
yeah,
I will cut in with a quick story because it's hysterical and indicative of the union. So I got out of Berklee and I got out a TV show, and I was doing studio work in Boston at this place called Soundtrack. And I get this gig on a TV show, live TV every day, morning show, 9 a.m., the Nancy Merrill show. And I start getting calls from the union. This guy's calling me up. Hey, you really should join the union. Well, I don't really think I should join the union because all the guys that I respect that are in unions say stay away from it. And he says, no, 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 it's really important and all this. So, anyways, three phone calls later, he finally wears me down to the point where I said, I'm not going to join the union, but I'll at least come in and say hello to you. And, hey, well, it's important. You're on TV every day. You're representative of musicians everywhere, blah, 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 all this fucking bullshit. So I finally say to him, I'll come down to the office, right? I said, are you still on Stewart Street? Because I knew they were behind the Copley Plaza on Stewart Street. And he said, yeah, where are you coming from? I said, well, I live in North Andover. I said, I'm coming down from North Andover. And he said, oh, well, you'll have to join the Lawrence local first, then get their permission to join the Boston local. And I just hung up the phone. And that was
yeah,
now I've been on hundreds and hundreds of jingle sessions. I've been on TV. I've been on Broadway. I've
yeah,
not one person in my entire 45-year professional career has ever asked me if I'm in the union,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know? And they were talking at that time, this is in the 80s, they were talking about the union pension fund. And since I was making more than scale, I would have to put in like $110 a week to the union pension fund that
right,
I was going to see when I hit my 60s,
yeah.
which I'm sure is probably still going strong. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I don't know, like, he really was let down by that community,
yeah, it's horrible. Yeah.
the people who really stood by him would be like the Erdogan brothers,
Right.
who got him right. I think the last 3 or 4 records of his, he wasn't even able to play on them, but,
Yeah.
like Me, Myself, and I'm trying to think of them. Uh,
Uh,
yeah, there's a few of them where he's not playing, he's paralyzed, but
right.
he's at least, composing and arranging or
Yeah.
working with the arrangers. And so,
Yeah.
people really tried, but, like I said, families are complicated, especially mine.
Well,
That was a tough time, and Sue dealt with it as best she could. So
yeah. Well, on a totally different subject. So you're a teenager in upstate New York. you obviously grew up with the music of your dad and his friends and everybody. What were you listening to at that time? What kind of music were you getting into? Was it like pop stuff, rock and roll,
Well, but,
jazz?
it's funny, I would say so my father died in 1979. So
Mhm.
really up until that point, I'd say I was listening to jazz and R&B. There was in upstate New York in Poughkeepsie, there was like a station that all day was rock and roll, but at like midnight it was R&B, Teddy Pendergrass,
Nice.
so I really liked
Yeah.
that stuff. And then after my dad died, I found it really hard to listen to jazz, because it was so
Well,
close
sure.
to me. And I remember
Mhm.
like I spent a lot, and I will say, I think I listen to a lot of stuff, and I'm going to do this movement because you know what I'm talking about with the radio spinning the dial, not
Yeah,
pushing a
yeah, yeah,
button but
sure.
spinning it, and it was weighted
Yeah.
perfectly, and you'd spin it. And so I would
Yeah.
lay in bed with the headphones on or the speakers and just spin the dial, and it land on something, and I'd listen to it for a while,
Mhm.
And so I then I definitely I would say I was really into Michael Jackson Off the Wall, sort of
Sure.
those kinds of arm funk bands I really like.
Mhm. Mhm.
um I will say that I got into reggae. I was really into reggae probably in the late 70s, Bob Marley and things like that. And
Mhm.
I
Right.
told this story recently. I was there the day Joni Mitchell came to meet my dad in Memphis.
No kidding.
Yeah. And
Oh.
I watched this whole interaction happen.
Mhm.
My dad had been thinking about, was like excited about it, and he had a couple of pieces he thought she would be great to sing on, and they put the lead sheet in front of her, and she said, "I don't know how to read that chicken scratch. It's, whatever. It looks like chicken scratch to me." And my dad was like, like he got a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
upset,
sure.
and but those two like fell in love. He really
Oh,
loved her, and it was great. And at one point, they had to take my dad out of the room because he was in a wheelchair,
yeah.
and so I was at the table with Joni, and she turned to me and said, "So what are you listening to?" And I said, "I really like reggae, and reggae
Uh-huh.
music." And she said, "Oh," and she took out a notepad and she wrote a note, and it was to the guy that ran Island Records.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and said, I forget his name. I have it somewhere, and he goes, "Send Eric
Mhm.
some reggae records, Joni." And in some way, I wish I'd kept the note more than but so
Right.
I dutifully wrote a letter to this guy and put her note in it, folded it up, and put it in the mail and sent it off. And I think like a few months later, I was mowing the lawn, and this big truck pulls up in front of the house. Like, "We're looking for Eric Mingus." Or Mangus, I think they said. And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." And they go, "We got a delivery for you," and they unloaded like 400 records. I mean, some,
No.
boxes of reggae. It was the entire reggae
Cap
collection of
yeah.
violent records. It was the entire thing.
Oh my god.
I had 12-inch and singles and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, the power of Joni Mitchell. I was just expecting to get a couple records.
Right,
They
yeah.
sent me it was
Yeah.
amazing. It was,
Oh my god.
so I really did a deep dive into reggae
Yeah.
then, because I just had this incredible history. But, I really loved jazz live. And
Mhm.
there was not to me, there's still nothing like it. I
Right.
records don't cover it. Records don't
No.
recordings of live concerts never get it. And I was fortunate to like hear many, many, many concerts of my dad live, but also all over,
Mhm.
Sonny Rollins. I mean, the list of people I got to see, I'm even shocked when I say it. Dizzy Gillespie, like all these guys.
Yeah, yeah.
And then especially like, and then when I said my father died, I couldn't listen. But because of the rift in the family, and we weren't really like, so a lot of the people that were in my life because I was with my dad disappeared because they I didn't really keep in touch with Sue's family
Right.
so much. So a lot of the people that were in my life weren't around anymore, weren't as accessible. So that's when
Yeah.
I started going to see live concerts. I mean, my dad's band towards the end of his life was George Adams, Don Pullen, and Danny Richmond was still alive at the
Yeah.
time. So I started following those guys and going seeing them play, and so I
Ah,
would, and then I had friends in New York, so I'd go down for the weekend, and we go down to the city and just hit every club we could, and that was,
right.
I think that's my fondest time.
Yeah.
I'd see, and I'd see that like Max Roach was playing, and I'd go, and Max was great
Yeah.
because unbeknownst to me, because my mother never talked about this life, Max Roach
Mhm.
was supposed to be my godfather. but
Oh.
my dad and him had some sort of falling out at a time. But but I went up to Max. I said, "Hey, I'm Eric Mingus," and he went, "Oh my God, I held you in my arms when you were a baby." And I was like,
Oh.
"Yes, your dad was on the road when you were born. So me and Lenny Bruce took care of your mom. Like, so Lenny Bruce and Max
Oh
Roach were
my god.
there when I was born, And I was like, wow,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So
Oh,
that
man.
this, but the live music that I got to see, in the eight, I guess it was
In
'80s, um,
early '80s, yeah,
early
yeah, or
'80s.
maybe
Dexter
yeah.
Gordon, I got to see so many
Oh,
times, and all
yeah.
these amazing people. Dexter, another guy who, I mean, he lived upstairs from my dad, so he recognized me,
Oh,
but it was just great, and it was great for me because I was old enough that these guys could tell me stories about my dad, and you know, and
that's cool, yeah.
and my dad had this thing about, um, I think in a way he knew he wasn't going to be around, for me,
Mhm.
so he would
Right.
always be teaching me every time I saw him, which could be annoying, but I really appreciate it now. But
Yeah, yeah,
like every
sure.
you walk up to your dad and he starts telling you a lesson, but and I remember him saying, like, you're gonna ignore everything I say and you're gonna do it, but I know you're gonna be like, oh man, he was right. And I said, yeah, there have been many times in my life, even up to this day, where I'll do
Yeah.
something and I go, that was a mistake. And I hear my dad in my head go,
Ah,
yeah, I told you.
yeah. Well, without dwelling on it, it's a really tough age, to lose a parent. I mean, any age is tough.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I have friends now who are losing their parents, they're my age, 60, whatever.
yeah.
And it's hard, I guess I was 14, I think, when my dad died, which is
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
rough age. And I think the
Yeah.
roughest thing for me is that for some reason, people think when you're 14 and you lose a parent that somehow you didn't really know your parents, you know?
Well, right.
And I'm
No,
like, I
no.
was in that room, and I witnessed
Yeah.
a lot of stuff, and I saw a lot of, and in fact, I would almost say you have a purer understanding of what's going on in that room than maybe an adult,
Yeah, yeah,
especially
absolutely.
the drunk ones.
Well, I mean, I was very lucky. My dad passed away about 10 years ago. And so I was 53. But, and we got very close after my mom passed. I mean, we were always very, very close. My whole family. There was only three of us, three boys, and my mom and dad. But yeah, I mean, well, it was sudden for my dad, but it was like, now what do I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like when 9/11 happened and my mom had died the May before that, and the first thing I wanted to do was pick up the phone and call my mom.
yeah,
And to have somebody that's the guy go at the and then worse to like lose a whole group of people at the same time that you don't have access to anymore because of the situation.
yeah.
But well, can I ask you? I know your dad taught you cello and bass. First of all, did you just not have any interest in continuing with cello, or did you move to bass because your dad had moved to bass from cello? Because I know that
Uh,
happened.
well,
But
I have gotten back into the cello.
yeah, I see that. Yeah.
That's more, the cello thing was interesting. I would have continued with it. I think it was more about like, availability of having the instrument. I traveled a lot, and in
Right.
fact, this upright bass is more new to me because I didn't always have one. And
Wow.
the
Mhm.
the electric upright is probably what I've had with me the most. Yeah, I don't. It's interesting. I started with cello because it looked like the bass, and I was very young. To be
Oh,
honest.
okay.
And so my
Yeah.
dad kind of taught me the cello in two ways. He would teach me it as the cello and as the instrument, but then he would also tune it as a bass. Um,
Okay.
but part of what happened was, so my father, when he was really young, he listened to the radio, was really excited, and his parents really believed in having culture in the home, which was a very popular thing in Watts. So they got pianos and when he
Right.
could, and tried to get music lessons. But my dad had an ear. He could hear a melody on the radio and then go over to the piano and have it figured out fairly
Sure.
quickly. So he always had a natural ear, and it was great in some ways and not so great in others. So when he got into he started on trombone, but he did well. I'm probably one of the few people that heard him play trombone because
Wow.
I played trumpet when we moved out of the city where we had string
Right.
instruments and we moved to the country, they only had brass. So I ended up with trumpet and he said, if you're going to play trumpet, you got to play trombone. So he showed me how to play trombone. But he did well in band because he could, he could say, I know this note and he could find it on the instrument. So he was kind of doing it. And then he transitioned to cello and made it into the, Los Angeles Youth Orchestra, which was a big deal.
Right. Which is a big
Playing.
deal.
Yeah, big deal. And he made it into that. And then, but he wasn't first chair, but he,
Mhm.
played all his parts and he was great. And then when he became first chair, they realized that he had pretty much gotten through to that point without sight reading.
Ah,
So it was
just
like,
on his ears, yeah.
and I had a similar, and I have a similar vibe. When I was very young, I could pick up an instrument. I could definitely sing it. You throw me a melody,
Right,
I could get it right back to you. I was similar, and I think my dad really, so he really had to like turn around and go, I have to sort of learn how to take this natural ability and sort of make it work with this, Western music concept. And so he really
right,
worked hard. And he said that, his bass playing was the thing he worked hardest on. He studied with like, bass teachers from the Philharmonic, and
right, mhm,
New York Philharmonic and
yeah,
LA Symphony Orchestra, and really worked hard at it. And he worked, and he did it in high school too. He went to write teachers and he could read and write, and
mhm,
he learned it all, and he mostly learned a lot of it the orchestrating in Hollywood, the sessions, and really being with friends, and learning, when he transitions, because they said, look, you play cello, you should play bass because you'll get work, and that's true,
right,
at the time.
sure,
So his buddy, like Buddy Collette and Illinois Jaquette and people like that, they were
mhm,
all from the same neighborhood, so they all played together, and so he had to really teach me. So when he, in his experience with music, felt the musicians were so reliant on the page that it was restricting the music. And he used to get really nuts, when people would be playing their instrument. I'm gonna mimic saxophone players, you know,
right,
and not looking up and not engaging. And he had, briefly been in the Ellington band, and those guys know their book.
right,
They don't really need to have the paper in front of them.
no,
They know their book, and they're watching, and they watch Duke, like a hawk, because he
mhm,
could change
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So my dad really wanted to figure a way to communicate musicians that, weren't the page. And he would, sometimes a lot of his pieces weren't arranged as, so to speak. There's sometimes
right,
just little melodies and stuff, and he'd point to
sketches,
sketches,
yeah,
exactly. And he liked that way and felt there was like a freedom to it. So when he learned that I had this thing, like he was giving me cello lessons, and one day he brought me to his studio with my cello, and he bowed a line on the bass, and I would try to mimic it, and I got really
sure,
good at it. And so he was like, well, you have this ear, I don't want you to lose this ear, but I also like, I was going to like a traditional cello teacher who would, so basically I was taking cello. I always love to tell this. My cello teacher was known as the oldest working cello teacher in the Guinness World Book of Records. She was like in her 80s or something, and she was so strict. And I remember, like,
mhm,
it was really excruciating taking lessons with her. And then, of course, then I'd go and I'd have a lesson with my dad, and he would undo everything that she had taught me, like, putting vibrato in and making it sound good. And then I'd go in and do that for her, and she'd get all mad. I would get my knuckles whacked because, I was putting emotion into this music.
right, 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 right,
And I know it was a struggle. It was a struggle for him that he won it over. I mean, he really became a great writer and a composer,
oh,
obviously, and arranger,
yeah,
and and played the hell out of his instrument. Uh,
yeah,
my relationship to the bass is I use it for my own stuff. I don't, I haven't been a session player in years. I don't,
mhm, mhm,
and I was doing, I got to do a concert with Yo-Yo. I was Yo-Yo Ma and friends in Knoxville, Tennessee,
mhm,
and there I was back. I was playing. I was doing Arco on my electric upright, and I had Edgar Meyer over there doing,
oh, Jesus, yeah,
over
yeah,
there, and Yo-Yo Ma in front of me, and I'm just watching their hands, And I've always loved Arco. I mean, blowing the bass is one of my, I love the instrument,
mhm,
and just watching Yo-Yo and his fingers and the way he worked the instrument made me long for the cello, because they're instruments I love playing on my own. I play it as a lot,
right,
and I don't consider myself. I would say mainly I'm a singer. That's really what I do.
right,
I play bass, I play guitar, a little bit of piano and things like that,
mhm,
but I use them like a toolkit for my own music,
Right.
and
Sure.
and there are times when I, I wish I had focused more on one of them, and my
Well,
limited chord knowledge on the guitar, so
yeah, yeah. Right.
sometimes I'm like, there are too
Well,
many strings on that thing. I just want to knock it
it's
down to four strings,
that's right. Get those pull Keith Richards at least, pull one
Yeah,
off.
yeah,
Um, but, well, I was lucky enough to be, pretty good friends with Gary Karr, and, uh
yeah, man.
and I'll tell you, when a bass is properly bowed, it can move you to tears.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I mean, his sound was like unlike anything I'd ever heard in person. And he actually came to town and did a couple of concerts at Penn's houses. And it was just, you really just start welling up. The sound is,
yeah,
it's just so beautiful. And unfortunately we just lost him last year.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
every bass player that I worked with, and I don't wanna say I worked with Ray Brown, but I was lucky enough to play with Ray and a lot of guys, and they just all worshiped Gary Carr,
yeah,
and when he did his debut concert, your dad was there.
yeah,
He loved to say, "Mingus was in the house when and it was just, it's incredible that you have that library of knowledge that you've accumulated by being around it and by playing. And I mean, you're doing what you want on the instrument for yourself. And
yeah.
that's a lot, it's better than being drilled to death as a teenager and locked in a room and
I mean,
forced to practice.
I love the instrument, and I just have to say, when I started, and mind you, it's the it's NS electric cello, but it feels beautiful. I really love playing it.
Hmm.
But a lot of that stuff kind came back to me. Lessons from my father. Just sort of the things he had told me about the
Wow.
hands, how to hold your hands, and it starts to come back.
Hmm.
Which is kind of was really comforting. Because
Right.
I I'm 61 now, and
Right.
my father's been gone since 1979, and he's still such a part of my life.
Hmm.
And it's not just. I mean, it there's a lot of it is like, yes, there's this collection in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much of him present, and a lot of times, um, for many years, I couldn't get away from it, and I desperately wanted to, but what's funny is now I'm not only embracing him, I'm embracing, my family line for that matter. I'm taking the story back to the, the soil of the Great Smoky Mountains and trying to really
Yeah.
understand. And actually through all this, I have family in that area I didn't know about because Daniel, my great grandfather went off and started other family. So
Sure.
there's, it's distant family, but it's really
No, but
powerful. But to connect with the instrument, we carry the physicality of our parents in our hands, and
Mhm.
so when I play that instrument, it's very healing. It's and aside from all the other stuff that comes with being the son of someone, um,
Right.
where the most comforting thing is, and the thing about, and this is about acoustic piano too, and cello and things like that,
Mhm.
is when you're in the room with one, it's a whole other experience, and I
Right.
know this when you got a good piano in front of you,
Oh, yeah.
and it's the same with
Yeah.
bass, and to me, it never really translates into record. There's some great records and great recordings out there, but when you're in the room, it's a different thing.
Right.
And when I
Right.
tell people that, yes, my dad sounds great on those records, but when you were laying on the floor as a kid listening to him play, there's nothing like it.
No.
People think they have this sound, but it's not. It's a whole other thing. And I find piano that way too because I've now heard you play a few times, and
Well,
you know it's
yeah,
in there.
but well, it really is different. And I mean, I have a really nice instrument at my house, a gorgeous 9-foot Kawai that is for me one of the best pianos I ever played. But when I'm going back to like 1981, when I first met Oscar Peterson, he had gotten his Bosendorfer and it was delivered to Buffalo, New York, where I'm from, to do a concert with the Buffalo Philharmonic before it was even sent up to his house in Mississauga.
uh,
And I was there when it was delivered, and he had the rehearsal, and went up on the stage, and I just hit a middle C, and this warm thing just like it just came up over my body, like literally you could feel it from your above your knees right up through your whole body, and I
yeah,
was like, this is amazing.
yeah,
And I've been like chasing that high ever since. I've played a million pianos since then. But and there was like a 1930s Chickering 7-foot grand that was at place in Boston, and they had rebuilt it just right. And yeah, I mean, it's a personal connection to be, like I said, to be in the room with Gary Carr, to be in the room with Ray, to be in the room with Niels. Because every time I heard Niels on an album, like an Oscar album and stuff, his bass always sounded kind of thin to me, But it turns out that that was just like the way they recorded bass in the 70s and 80s. When he was standing next to him, it was super deep and powerful and a beautiful sound, you
Yeah.
know?
You know what I find really fascinating now? I'll jump in. I worked with the great guitarist Hubert Sumlin, who was with
Oh, yeah.
Alan Wolf,
Yep.
who is probably, I mean, he is a huge influence on me. Huge, just
Mhm.
sort of as a being, as a person.
Yeah.
And that saying, "Oh, the sound is in your fingers." When people say like,
Right.
I'm not saying I never believed it. I get it. Some guys can walk up
Uh-huh.
to, but I remember I was hanging out backstage after a show, and this young girl came up. I mean, girl, she was like 6 or 7, and
Right.
she wanted Hubert to sign her guitar. This like 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid,
Wow.
huge Howlin' Wolf fan, huge Hubert
Nice.
Sumlin fan, wanted to play guitar like Hubert. I mean, just like this amazing, I think we were in Germany or something. It's like a white
Uh-huh.
German kid,
Yeah.
and he picked up the guitar, and it was like a Hello Kitty guitar, pink thing with
Right.
Hello Kitty on it, and he loved it. He loved it, and he said, "You know what? I'm going to plug it in and play it, and then you could tell people Hubert someone played this guitar." So
Yeah.
he plugs it into his amp, and he starts playing it, and it's like, holy smokes, that's Hubert some, like, you were like, man, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're not thinking, I think they're actually good guitars. I don't necessarily know for sure,
Oh,
the Hello Kitty
Hello
factory.
Kitty guitars? That's a
Yeah,
good
the
line.
Hello
Yeah.
Kitty, but
Well,
and then I realized piano player, Don Pullen, who, good,
oh, yeah.
I loved him. It was like family to me. I could see him go into a club, and the piano just becomes what he needs it to be. Even if it's
Yep.
not a great piano,
Right.
he would get that sound out of it.
No, it's exactly, I mean, there was this place, on the Cape that Dave McKenna used to play, and, he went back there, like, 20 years later, and the piano was this little shitty piano in the corner, and I know for a fact that the B flat, above middle C was broken. There was, like, an F broken not too far away, and he just sat down at that piano, and it sounded like Dave McKenna, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I just played it in B." I just played the tune in the key of B instead of C. I just avoid those notes.
Yeah,
And I mean, and it's really yeah, you can get a sound. I mean, it's harder. It seems like it's harder on a stringed instrument than a horn, because
yeah,
you can
yeah,
get a sound on a horn.
yeah,
But to get a distinctive sound on a piano is really a. I mean, Bill Evans, all the guys,
yeah, yeah,
Oscar. You soon from the first notes, it's them,
yeah.
and that's it's yeah, it's but and Penn tells a story about the guitar player for ZZ Top. I'm just blanking on his name. And but anyways, he did the same thing. Like some kids came to him after a show. He had some fancy guitar, and they said, "Well, yeah, you can play like that because you got this fancy guitar." And he
Yeah,
told his roadie, he said, "Go to Guitar Center and buy like the cheapest Les Pauls and the cheapest Strats and everything." And he said, "I want to play on an instrument that they can afford."
yeah,
And he played, and it was him. I mean, it was all in his
yeah.
fingers. You know what I mean? And I'm doing him a horrible disservice because I can't bring to mind his name. Uh, Jesus, I remember Frank Beard's the drummer and Dusty Springfield. Anyways, there's something to be said for. Well, obviously you've witnessed this firsthand. I mean, your father from the first notes he plays, it's Mingus. You know
Well,
what I mean? You're not
yeah, yeah, for
you're not going to
sure.
confuse him
Yeah,
with Paul Chambers.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
um, but I love that you've got the electric cello back there now, and now you can do a couple of duets with Yo Yo Ma.
That's true. Yeah. Well,
Um,
what's fun, Yo-Yo nearly played it. I think people were like, maybe you shouldn't, out of his people,
right?
because I
Yeah,
brought it with
sure.
me to the session when we recorded the studio version of the Mill,
Ah,
and he was all plugged in, and they were like, "Nah, we don't have a way to record that." And I thought to myself,
sure.
I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It's a recording studio.
yeah,
We don't
yeah,
have a way to
yeah,
record
yeah.
it.
So, but that's
Um,
fine. No, I get it. I get it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he's interesting too because I think he, sometimes he's playing, in the rainforest, so he's not bringing his Stradivarius cello. He's bringing
Right.
another one.
Yeah,
I think he
yeah.
does have a. I think he has like a what they call it, like some some not wood version of a cello, for like kind of
Yeah.
playing on a boat or whatever, But
Well,
yeah, I mean it's been an amazing experience. But I love instruments, and I guess what I guess sort of looming in my head lately is the thought that like I'll use Dave Sanborn as an example.
mhm.
Hearing him on records, I mean it's Dave Sanborn. He's playing amazing
Yeah,
stuff, but he has this sound. And
right.
when you hear him live, because I was fortunate, I was with this band, Karen Mantler and My Cat Arnold. It was
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and
I knew Karen.
yeah, yeah,
Jeez.
yeah. We did that television show. It was way back that David Sanborn had.
Oh, the one at night. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, night music, and we went and like I think I had heard David play, but it was live in a microphone. I'd never been in the
right.
same like in the room,
Mhm.
and he is loud, like
Oh, yeah.
loud. And
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, wow, I hadn't and loud with tone, not loud for the sake of loud.
No, no.
And I started thinking about that a lot because Michael Brecker has this particular sound on record that you
Yep.
hear and you know it's Michael Brecker. But Michael
Mhm.
Brecker live was a whole other thing,
I agree. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I saw the Brecker brothers millions of times. I saw them with Jocko
Mhm.
Pastorius, all this stuff. And Jocko too, like for some reason, you had to be in the room to really appreciate that bass sound. I mean,
Mhm.
great on
Yeah, yeah.
record and it plays amazing, but that being in the room, and I guess I'm just going, you gotta go hear the music live, really,
Right.
you know?
Well, no, I
That
agree, and I
really
mean, I did a few sessions with, David, jingle sessions in New York, and, he was in we put him in the booth, um, because that
yeah,
sound was big,
yeah.
and yeah, I think I went to Berkeley with Karen Mantler, that's where I know her
Wait a
from,
minute. Then you were there when I was there.
I believe I might have been. I was there 81, 82, 83, eighty
Yeah.
four, and
I think
85.
I was late slightly later than that because I went as an old man.
Oh, okay.
I was in my
Well,
20s, I think, at the time,
yeah, well, she
but yeah.
was there my last year,
Right, so I
uh,
came in probably just after you had left, but yeah.
86, yeah,
Yeah, somewhere in there, yeah.
but,
Yeah, there was a big strike at Berkeley, and I was just having this conversation,
oh, yeah.
teacher strike, so that would be the
I think it
year I was there,
I
or
think that was 85 or 86,
6,
yeah.
yeah, I think it was '86,
Um,
yeah.
but I was just back in Berkeley when I just was in Boston. We did 3 nights at the Schubert, uh,
Nice.
this past weekend, and I
Nice.
hadn't been to Boston in 25 years,
Wow.
and it was wild. I went to the Mass Ave building, which was where all the classrooms were,
Yeah.
and now it's all just dorms,
Wow.
and there's a big building with classrooms in it now. They own the whole block.
Yeah,
It's
it's really evolved. I mean, I did not do well there as a student. It was just not my thing. I was there like a semester and a day. I never
yeah,
did,
I
it was a weird
I gotta
thing.
tell you, I learned nothing at Berkeley except I made connections with players that I still admire. And when I got out of Berkeley was when my education started because I mean, well, I shouldn't say I learned nothing. I studied a little with Herb Pomeroy. I
Mhm.
mean, I meant I learned nothing in the classrooms. I learned a lot from personal teachers.
Yeah.
But ear training, 4 was not my cup of tea. I mean, I just did the assignments and but the thing is, I got out of Berkeley and I got gigs all around Boston with guys like Dick Johnson and Herb Pomeroy and Gray Sargent and that's where I learned, oh, Dick likes these kind of voicings. Oh, Herb likes, these kind of voicings. And that was my real education was like the 2 or 3 years after Berkeley that I was still in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was gigging before I got there and then
Uh-huh.
wasn't gigging when I was there. It just didn't really gel with me. But
Yeah.
I did have a long relationship with Berkeley, and that was because there were so many good people that teach there.
Yeah. Great
I
guy.
had a friend who's unfortunately not with us anymore, Jeff Friedman, who was in the,
Oh, Jeff's
jazz,
gone? I knew
yeah,
Jeff.
yeah,
Yeah.
jazz composition. And he just was a dear
Yeah.
friend.
Great teacher.
We worked. He great guitar player, blues.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
friends for a long time, and he was wonderful because he also a huge, really knowledgeable on Ellington, really knowledgeable
Yeah.
on my dad, and so I would go there and he would, we'd go over it, and I mean, there was a great Mingus class there.
Yep.
A lot of, so it has real value. I was terrible at networking and keeping connections and knowing, I never was good at it. I don't even
Right.
really know, I don't know who I should have been hanging out with or whatever. But I know a lot of people that
Yeah.
have those, have friends and people that they've been working with forever, and from that,
Yeah,
and
I
I think it's
don't
valuable.
either.
Yeah.
I don't either, but I knew people.
Yeah.
One of the guys I loved to death was Herb Pomeroy. To have that experience of playing with a guy that played with Bird and, just and played in Duke's band.
Yeah.
And he told this great story. He had a class, I'm sure it was there when you were there, called Arranging in the Style of Duke Ellington. And Duke said to him, like in the late '60s, he said, "I've got to come up to Boston and learn what I do."
Yeah.
and,
Yeah,
and
Herb was great. It was one again, that was always worth it, to go visit Jeff Friedman down there, and and Herb was still there, and
yeah, yeah. I mean, and now well, I mean, it's really strange. I met them once at a reception when I was there. Lee Burke and his wife Susan, and about 3 years ago, I suddenly connected with them out here in Vegas because they're friends with Paul and Sue Loudon that own this Vix club here, and they're big jazz promoters,
yeah,
and or promoters of jazz, big fans. And he's kind of a beloved figure around town. Anyways, but Sue Burke and Lee came up when I did a record with Penn and Jeff Hamilton,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and we did a record release party there, and they showed up, and I connected with them, and then I went out. They lived in this really high end retirement community in Phoenix, and they have a state of the art auditorium there, and they bring in people like Jeff Hamilton and David Sanborn and all their
oh,
jazz friends,
nice,
and they do little performances. So I did one of those for them. But then Lee passed away last year, and Sue, she's doing fine. She's still there. But I called her from Mass Ave, and I said, "You now own Massachusetts Avenue." I said, Berkeley is now on both sides of the street.
yeah,
It used to be TC's, the bar, the
yeah,
dive bar across the
yeah,
street, and
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
pizzeria. Now it's all Berkeley flags all along it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, it's
Wow,
wild.
yeah, I think she has a book now, right? Oh,
Oh,
yeah, because I noticed. I think she was just pointing over here because Santa Fe is that way. Um,
Mhm.
I saw that she was doing some kind of book reading or something,
Oh,
if
wow.
I'm not
Oh, I'll have to
mistaken.
check into that.
I believe that,
Yeah. But they're nice, but
yeah,
I mean, it's like, "Oh, you're the guy the college was named after." Um,
yeah, yeah,
but,
yeah.
um,
I mean, like I said, I don't, I'm not knocking it. I mean,
no,
their online stuff is helping so many kids connect with their instruments, and it's great.
as I said, I like to think that you and I, and not me a little bit more because I'm older, but, we were like at the last of the golden age of Berkeley when all the real heavy duty teachers were there that knew the shit. And
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying that the staff there is not good. I'm sure they're great, but I saw it was going downhill when I pulled up all the Rolling Stone magazine, and there was a full page ad for Berkeley in it, and it said, "Learn music production and engineering the way Quincy Jones did at Berkeley."
right,
You know,
right,
Quincy went when Quincy studied arranging when it was this Schillinger house on Newbury Street, you
right,
know?
right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. The thing also that as much as that history is amazing, is that it has to keep up with the way the music industry
Right.
changes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in fact, and when I was there was literally the first year they had a vocal
And
department.
P&E.
They had
Yeah,
the first year of the vocal department was that mid
right.
80s,
I rem
y you know,
I
and
so I must have been there. I must have overlapped with you because I remember that. I
yeah,
remember that, and they also started the music production and engineering program,
yeah,
MP&E.
and to be honest, those 2 brought a lot of people to that
Oh,
school, especially
yeah,
the production,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I don't knock it, it was definitely not for me, I'm not a workbook method person, I'm just not,
No, no,
uh,
no, as I said, my first teacher, I learned we had 2 player pianos in my house growing up, and, uh, and I wanted to play Fats Waller stuff on the
yeah,
piano, and I went to my teacher and I found the book years ago, like from when I was 3 or 4 years old, my first lesson book, and he just wrote out melodies in whole notes and a chord symbol, And so I had to learn to improvise from the very beginning to make it
Yeah.
sound like I wanted it to sound. And the first song was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and like the second or third song was Limehouse Blues,
Wow.
because that's the stuff that I wanted to learn. And but anyways, it was just nostalgic being back in Boston after 25 years because it's totally different.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about player piano. My dad, a huge influence on him was Jelly Roll Morton.
Yep.
And when I was a kid, we went, and I want to say it was a barber shop, but it was up in Harlem. And I was very young, so I believe it was a barber shop. They had a player piano, and it was a scroll that was Jelly Roll actually played
Right.
for them to make
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So I just remember it was like this ghost of Jelly Roll Morton playing in this barbershop. It was really amazing, and
It's really
you could see
yeah.
how his fingers landed,
Right.
and it was really amazing. I mean, it's quite. I always find that really fascinating. That the player piano thing is really amazing.
Yeah, well, we had my dad was a huge music fan, and a pretty good amateur singer, but he never did anything with it. But we had our whole basement was set up like a bar, and this is in the '60s in Buffalo, New York. We had a player piano, a roulette wheel, an old Wurlitzer jukebox, 1,000 piano rolls, uh, and all of this old bar paraphernalia. He collected old signs and stuff, and he had Michelob beer on tap. He would get a quarter keg of Michelob beer and had it on tap in our house. So every Friday and Saturday night, everyone came to our house instead of going out to a club.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it was really a weird way to grow up. But when I was about 7 or 8 and I had already been playing the piano and showed some promise, he bought a Duo Art, an Alien Weber piano with a Duo Art reproducing player action in it, which was like the state of the art in the 20s. I grew up listening to George Gershwin play Rhapsody. It got louder and softer and sustained.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It was they called it a reproducing player.
yeah,
And I grew up with those rolls upstairs and the Fats Waller rolls and the J. Lawrence Cook and Earl Hines. And then one of the great moments in my life was in the early 80s. I did a show in Buffalo, and the guy came up and he said, I'm the president of QRS Piano Rolls. And he said, I want you to make a piano roll. And
nice.
I got to go up to Niagara Street in Buffalo and play the piano that Duke and everybody played.
Wow.
Fats Waller, everybody. And it was amazing because it had ivory keys, but the keys were all worn in.
Yeah,
So they were
yeah,
like, it was all scalloped.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
it was so stupid because there was no action. You press the keys down manually for the play it, and then it put ink on the paper, and then these women would cut out a master roll.
Right.
And it was just unbelievable. And then I wound up making like 10 or 15 hour-long discs MIDI, for them for the new systems.
Right.
But I made like 3 or 4 piano rolls, and I was really that was to grow up with that in your house
Yeah.
and
Oh,
see
that's
it,
amazing.
and then it was really fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but anyways, I got off on a tangent because I do that. But yeah, Berklee was. I mean, again, I got my education after Berklee, and then I was doing studio work, and then I went to Vegas and play with a singer, and then Penn came in and said, "You want to play in our show?" and, and I said, "Sure, why not?"
yeah,
That
yeah,
was 25 years ago.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I'll tell you, Penn started practicing a lot during the pandemic, an hour a day, and turned himself into a damn good bass player.
Yeah.
And he bought an unbelievable instrument. He owns. There was a session guy in LA, David Stone,
Mhm.
who played on Jaws. He played on every soundtrack you've ever heard. He was the studio number one studio guy, and he had this. No, I can't think. I don't know. Forget the name, but some bass made in the '30s that the guy made like 7 or 8 basses, and they're all highly sought after.
He's
And
that
he bought it
LA.
from his
He's the
family.
LA based luthier, right?
Um,
The bass player was
yeah,
bass builder is
uh,
from there.
yeah. I'm
I
trying to.
seem to remember seeing something
Uh,
about this, but yeah,
Tenegas, Paul Tenegas.
yeah, that sounds
I
right.
think that's his name.
Yeah.
And and the bass, holy I walked across. You mean you've been to our theater? You do know how big that stage is. Alex Frank got the bass for Penn and brought it into town, and he hit a low E on that thing, and it rolled across the whole stage at me. I'm like, "You could play that without an amp in this room."
Yeah,
That's how, it's
that's
just a
amazing.
beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful instrument. So the next time you come to Vegas, you got, obviously you'll come to the show, but
yeah.
and and I'll buy you dinner. Um, but you got to play this bass. It's really a special instrument.
Well, I
Um,
love, it's funny because I don't know if I mentioned this or I'd said it, but my wife is an amazing saxophone player and really
Mhm.
knows Ellington's music. Ellington started playing piano for magicians, like that's how he started.
Yes,
And
yes.
I always love that, and I always feel like that's very evident in his music. You know,
It is. It is
it's
very
there.
and
Yeah,
and I jokingly said when I got the gig with Penn and Teller, I said, "Wow, who knows where this will lead? I can play for magicians now." And I maybe Duke started that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But well, I could talk to you for another 4 hours, but
Yeah,
um,
I feel like we just barely
I
scratched the surface of
we
things. So
did.
it's good. Yeah, yeah,
And if I'd love to have you come back and talk some more because there's so much more shit to cover.
yeah.
But I would, if you would do it again, we'd love to
I
keep
happily
going.
do it anytime again.
Yeah. And we're trying to get the word out about the Big Stereo Image podcast. If you have a chance, please join our monthly email list over at thestereoimage.com or follow us on Instagram or Threads at the.stereo.image. Absolutely follow us. Don't even bother with the damn mailing list. Just follow us.